From cities built on the sea, to highways carved through mountains, to structures so massive they can be seen from space, these are not just projects, they are human ambition at its absolute peak. In this video, we're diving into the most insane mega projects ever created, where billions of dollars, cutting-edge technology, and bold ideas come together to defy nature itself. Get ready to explore the impossible, because these are the projects that prove nothing is out of reach. Some bridges are built to cross water, others are built to dominate it. Rising high above the St. John's River, the Dames Point Bridge stretches across Jacksonville like a pair of towering sentinels. Its massive cable-stayed design lifts the roadway far above passing ships, creating a structure that feels both elegant and intimidating at the same time. From a distance, it looks perfectly balanced, but up close, the scale becomes overwhelming. The twin pylons rise sharply into the sky, anchored by a web of steel cables that hold the entire roadway in tension. Every cable carries a precise load. Every angle is calculated, because here, balance is everything. As vehicles climb toward the center span, the incline becomes noticeable. The city begins to fall away behind you, replaced by open sky and wide water below. At the highest point, there is a brief moment where the horizon stretches endlessly in all directions, and then comes the descent. But the real challenge isn't what you see, it's what the structure must endure. Strong coastal winds push against the cables. Heavy traffic creates constant vibration. Heat and humidity expand and contract the materials day after day. The bridge is in a continuous state of adjustment, responding to forces that never stop. From the driver's seat, it feels smooth, almost effortless, but beneath that calm surface lies a structure constantly working to hold itself together, suspended in perfect tension above the river. What if a building could be both a city and a living space? In Rotterdam, the Markthal redefines what architecture can be. At first glance, it appears as a massive curved arch, rising like a gateway of glass and stone, but inside, it reveals something entirely unexpected. A marketplace enclosed within a giant residential structure. The outer shell forms a horseshoe-shaped building with apartments lining the interior curve, and at the center, a vast open hall stretches upward, filled with light, movement, and color. Look up, and the ceiling becomes the real spectacle. A massive digital mural explodes across the surface, fruits, vegetables, flowers, scaled to surreal proportions, turning the entire space into an immersive artwork. It feels less like a market and more like stepping inside a living painting, but behind the beauty lies careful engineering. The structure must support hundreds of residential units while maintaining a completely open interior space below. Glass walls seal the ends of the arch, protecting the market from wind and weather while allowing natural light to flood in. It's a delicate balance between function and design. Between public and private space, people shop, eat, and move through the market below, while others live their daily lives just meters above, separated by nothing more than structure and intention. The Markthal is not just a building, it is a fusion of worlds where architecture doesn't divide space. It unites it. Some roads are meant to be traveled, others are meant to define a city. Cutting through the heart of Dubai, Sheikh Zayed Road is more than a highway, it is the backbone of a skyline built on ambition. Stretching for miles, this multi-lane artery carries a constant flow of movement beneath some of the tallest and most iconic skyscrapers in the world. Here, speed is part of the identity. Cars move in synchronized streams, surrounded by glass towers that rise like vertical walls on either side. The road doesn't just pass through the city, it frames it, turning every journey into a corridor of steel and light. By day, it is relentless. Heat radiates from the asphalt. Traffic surges forward in waves. The city feels mechanical, precise, always in motion. But at night, everything changes. The towers ignite with light. Reflections shimmer across glass surfaces. The road becomes a glowing ribbon, threading through a futuristic landscape that feels almost unreal. Yet beneath this polished image lies complexity. Managing traffic across so many lanes requires constant control, timing, surveillance, coordination. One disruption can ripple outward, slowing an entire section of the city. The system depends on flow, and flow must be maintained. Because here, Arabic ta, Arabic wow, Arabic kaf, Arabic fa is not an option. Sheikh Zayed Road is not just infrastructure, it is movement made visible. A symbol of a city that never pauses, always pushing forward, always accelerating into what comes next. James W.B. Dalton Highway, Alaska. This road ends at the Arctic Ocean. That fact alone should recalibrate every assumption you have about what a highway is supposed to be. The Dalton Highway in Alaska stretches 666 kilometers from Livengood, north of Fairbanks, all the way up to Deadhorse on the shores of Prudhoe Bay, where the Arctic oil fields sit frozen into the permafrost at the top of the continent. It is named after James William Dalton, a civil engineer who worked on the early oil exploration in northern Alaska. It is often listed among the most dangerous roads in North America, and that listing is entirely deserved. The road was built in 1974 primarily to support the construction of the Trans-Alaska Pipeline System, and it was completed in an almost unbelievable 5 months, a feat of engineering speed that makes more sense when you understand how much money was waiting at the other end. Today it serves as the supply lifeline for the oil operations at Prudhoe Bay and for the handful of communities scattered along its length. Roughly 60% of the road is unpaved gravel. The rest is asphalt, but asphalt that has been heaved and cracked and patched by permafrost movement until it barely resembles its original surface. Drive at 40 to 50 miles per hour on the gravel sections. Push that speed and you risk shredding your tires on the sharp stones or sending a rock through your windshield with enough force to do serious damage. This is not a suggestion from a cautious tourist. This is practical survival advice. In summer, the road is a tunnel of fine dust that follows every vehicle for hundreds of meters. In winter, the dust is replaced by ice and compacted snow. The wind scours the road at speeds that make visibility effectively zero, and the temperature drops to -40 degrees Celsius. At that temperature, exposed skin freezes in minutes. Engines that are not properly winterized do not start. Fuel lines gel. Metal becomes brittle. The Atigun Pass section, at 1,456 meters, is the highest highway pass in Alaska. The grades are steep, the surface in winter is treacherous, and the pass is known for sudden violent weather that can change conditions from manageable to genuinely life-threatening in a matter of minutes. Oil tanker trucks own this road. They are enormous, they move constantly, and they do not yield easily. When a tanker passes a smaller vehicle on the gravel sections, the rocks thrown up by its tires are not just inconvenient. They are hazardous projectiles. Keep your distance. Give them room. This is not optional. If the Dalton Highway makes the Arctic feel alive and brutal and real, wait until you hear about a train bridge in India that stretches almost 3 kilometers out over the open Indian Ocean, where the sea is only meters below the track and the rusted steel shudders under the weight of every passing train. Some buildings don't rise into the sky, they bend it. On the calm waters of Tehu Lake, a glowing ring appears to float above the surface, a perfect circle of light and reflection. Known as the Sheraton Haju Hot Spring Resort, This structure defies the traditional idea of what a hotel should be. It doesn't climb upward, it curves. The entire building forms a continuous loop, arching over the water like a man-made moon. By day, its glass surface reflects the sky and lake, blending almost seamlessly into its surroundings. But as night falls, it transforms, illuminated from within, becoming a radiant halo hovering in the darkness. From a distance, it looks effortless, but the reality is far more complex. Supporting a structure of this shape requires precise engineering. The curved form must distribute weight evenly across both sides, maintaining perfect balance while resisting wind forces and environmental stress. Every section of the building is interconnected, meaning that pressure in one area affects the entire loop. Inside, the experience is just as surreal. Rooms follow the curve, subtly shifting perspectives. Hallways don't feel linear, they guide movement in a continuous arc, creating the sense of being inside something alive, something complete. It is not just a place to stay, it is a statement. A reminder that architecture doesn't have to reach higher to stand apart. In Brisbane, silence doesn't last long. It is broken by impact, rhythm, and roar. The Gabba stands as one of cricket's most intense arenas, not because of its size, but because of its atmosphere. On match days, it becomes something alive, something that reacts rather than simply hosts. Crowds fill the stands in waves of color and sound. The pitch below looks simple: grass, soil, boundary lines, but every inch carries pressure built from decades of competition. Fast bowlers turn the air itself into a weapon. Batsmen respond in fractions of a second, and the stadium absorbs it all. What most people don't see is how much engineering sits behind the emotion. The stands are shaped to amplify sound, trapping and bouncing crowd energy back onto the field. Even the wind behaves differently inside the ground, subtly redirected by the stadium structure. At night, under floodlights, the pitch becomes a spotlighted stage. Every delivery feels amplified. Every cheer feels heavier than it should. And yet, despite all the noise, the ground remains controlled, measured, maintained, and reset for the next moment of uncertainty. It is not just a cricket stadium. It is a pressure chamber for human focus. On November 7, 1940, 4 months and 7 days after the first Tacoma Narrows suspension bridge opened across the Puget Sound in Washington state, a photographer named Barney Elliott set up his 16-movie camera and filmed one of the most important engineering failures ever recorded. The footage, available online and viewed by every engineering student who has encountered it since, shows a suspension bridge oscillating. At first, the movement appears almost gentle, a slight undulation in the deck, a gentle, rhythmic rise and fall, and then the motion changes character. The deck begins to twist, not just move up and down, but rotate along its longitudinal axis, the two edges rising and falling in opposite directions, the tarmac surface visible at wild angles as the twisting increases. The bridge is tearing itself apart. And then, in a visual event that still seems impossible even in 2024, the center span collapses and 2,800 feet of suspension bridge falls into the Narrows. No human died in the collapse of the original Tacoma Narrows Bridge. One dog trapped in an abandoned car did not survive, but the collapse killed something else, a set of assumptions about aerodynamics, structural resonance, and suspension bridge design that had persisted, largely unexamined, since the beginning of modern bridge engineering. The first Narrows Bridge was designed with a solid deck plate, a flat, solid roadway surface that acted in the 40 mph winds that struck the bridge that morning like an airfall. The wind did not simply push the bridge sideways. It interacted with the aerodynamics of the deck to create a resonant oscillation, the same phenomenon that can shatter a wine glass with a precisely tuned sound frequency that fed itself with increasing amplitude until the structure could no longer contain it. The replacement bridge, opened in 1950, incorporated the lessons: deeper stiffening girders, open truss side panels to allow wind to pass through the deck rather than interact with it as a solid surface, and the first systematic application of wind tunnel testing to bridge design in the United States. The current crossing consists of two parallel spans, the 1950 replacement and a second span added in 2007, carrying Interstate 16 across the Narrows at a height sufficient for naval vessels to transit underneath. The structure is robust. The engineering is conservative. The design incorporates, at every point, the specific humility of engineers who know exactly what happens when a bridge is not designed to respect the wind. Crossing the modern Tacoma Narrows Bridge requires knowing its history. Not because the current structure is dangerous, it isn't, beyond the ordinary risks of freeway driving, but because knowing what stood on this exact site, knowing what the Puget Sound wind did to it. Knowing that a filmmaker watched it destroy itself over the course of a few hours. One November morning turns a routine highway crossing into a continuous low-frequency meditation on the relationship between human confidence and natural forces. The water below is the same water. The wind is the same wind. Only the bridge has changed. New York does not build quietly, and the Williamsburg Bridge is proof of that. Stretching across the East River, it carries trains, cars, cyclists, and pedestrians in layers stacked above one another, each moving with its own rhythm, yet sharing the same suspended path. From a distance, it looks industrial, almost chaotic. Steel towers rise like exposed bones of the city's infrastructure, cables fanning outward into dense geometric patterns that seem more functional than beautiful. But that is only the surface. The real complexity is in motion. Subway trains rumble across its upper decks, creating vibrations that travel through steel cables and anchor points. Below, vehicles move in steady streams, while pedestrians cross in quieter observation, watching Manhattan and Brooklyn shift perspectives with every step. The bridge is never still. It expands in summer heat, contracts in winter cold, and flexes constantly under changing loads. Engineers designed it to move because stopping movement would mean braking under pressure. At night, the structure becomes a line of lights suspended above dark water, connecting two worlds that never stop changing. It is not just a crossing. It is a system that breathes with the city. In Chengdu, architecture sometimes stops pretending to be normal. The Fangun building looks like something lifted from symbolism rather than engineering, a massive square frame wrapped around a circular core. From above, it resembles an ancient coin. From the ground, it feels like a portal embedded into the skyline. It is not designed to blend in. It is designed to be interpreted. The circular structure at its center rises like a continuous loop of glass and steel, while the surrounding square frame holds it in place, two opposing geometries locked into a single identity. One represents tradition, the other modernity. Together, they create tension that defines the building's presence. At night, the structure glows from within. The circular core becomes a ring of light suspended in darkness, while the square frame sharpens into a glowing boundary around it. The contrast makes the building feel less like a structure and more like a concept made physical. But behind the symbolism lies precision engineering. The circular load distribution requires careful balancing of forces across curved surfaces, while the outer frame carries structural stability against wind and seismic stress. Every section depends on the other. It is not just a building, it is geometry turned into identity. In Norway, landscapes are not crossed, they are conquered carefully. The Hardinger Bridge stretches across one of the country's deepest fjords, where cliffs drop sharply into dark water and mountains rise like frozen waves. There is no easy way across this terrain, only engineered compromise. This bridge does not sit lightly on the land, it spans it. Long suspension cables anchor into rock on both sides, holding a roadway that seems to float above the fjord itself. Beneath it, the water is still and deep, giving no visual reassurance of safety or distance. The scale creates distortion. Cars moving across the bridge appear small, almost fragile, suspended between two massive geological walls. Wind moves through the fjord with force, pushing against the structure in unpredictable patterns. To survive this, the bridge is built to flex, not rigidly, but intelligently. It absorbs movement from wind, temperature shifts, and traffic loads, adjusting in micro-movements that are invisible to those crossing it. Engineers designed it not to resist nature, but to share space with it. At certain moments, fog rolls in and hides everything below. Only the road remains visible. A thin human line across an ancient world. In the Netherlands, water is not an obstacle. It is something the country negotiates with constantly, intelligently, and with centuries of experience behind it. The Velamir aqueduct is one of the clearest expressions of that philosophy, a road that does not cross water but passes through it. At first glance, it looks almost impossible. A lake stretches across the landscape, and instead of a bridge rising above it, the water itself is interrupted by a shallow, engineered channel where boats pass below and cars pass above. Two worlds share the same coordinates without interfering. Above, vehicles move along a normal roadway, experiencing no disruption, no awareness that beneath their tires, boats are gliding through a hidden continuation of the lake. Below, the waterway remains fully navigable, uninterrupted by road traffic, protected by concrete walls that hold back the weight and motion of the structure above. This is not a compromise. It is separation through layering. The aqueduct works because it redefines what crossing means. Instead of forcing one mode of transport to yield to another, it assigns them different vertical realities. Gravity becomes a scheduling tool, water becomes a lower-level system, traffic becomes an upper-level flow. Structurally, the challenge is immense. The aqueduct must support continuous vehicular loads while resisting water pressure from both sides of the canal walls. Waterproofing systems, drainage channels, and reinforced concrete layers ensure that neither system contaminates the other. Even small leaks would compromise the integrity of both transport layers. But the most striking aspect is psychological. Drivers often cross without realizing they are over water at all. There is no visual cue, no dramatic elevation change, no sense of exposure. It feels like an ordinary road until you see it from a distance and realize it is floating above an active waterway. It is infrastructure that hides its own impossibility, a solution that doesn't announce itself, just quietly proves that land and water can occupy the same space. If you separate time and layer them carefully enough. Skipper's Canyon Road, New Zealand, the story of its construction. They needed to get heavy machinery into a canyon whose walls were made of vertical slate. The canyon floor was inaccessible, the ridges above were sheer, and the gold at the bottom was not going to wait. The story of Skipper's Canyon Road begins in the 1860s, when gold was discovered in the Shotover River, and a rush of prospectors descended on the rugged Otago landscape of New Zealand's South Island in search of their fortune. The Shotover River, known as the richest river in the world at the peak of the gold rush, runs through Skipper's Canyon, and getting equipment, supplies, and eventually ore out of that canyon was the engineering problem that defined the road's creation. The canyon walls are composed primarily of schist, a dark metamorphic rock that fractures in sheets and layers, creating the dramatic vertical and near-vertical cliff faces that still characterize the route today. There was no path along the canyon for wheeled vehicles. Tracks existed for pack horses and on foot, but bringing in the sluicing machinery and stamping batteries that industrial-scale gold recovery required was impossible on those tracks. The provincial government of Otago surveyed the canyon and proposed a road. The solution chosen was not to build through the valley floor, which was periodically flooded by the Shotover River, but to carve a ledge into the schist cliff walls above the flood line. This ledge would be blasted and cut into the vertical rock face, wide enough for a horse-drawn cart, and it would follow the canyon walls at a height that kept it above the worst of the flooding while remaining accessible from the canyon entrance. Construction began in the 1860s using teams of workers with black powder explosives and hand tools. The schist, unlike marble or granite, tends to fracture in predictable ways along its natural cleavage planes, and the workers learned to use this property to their advantage. Rather than attempting to blast the rock into submission, the best workers learned to coax it, to place charges where the natural fractures would do most of the work, to split away sections along the planes the rock itself suggested. Even so, the work was brutal and dangerous. Workers died in blasting accidents. Tools wore out faster than they could be replaced. The mountain weather, which in the Otago Highlands can change from warm sunshine to driving sleet in minutes, added constant environmental pressure to an already difficult task. The road was functional by the late 1860s and allowed wheeled traffic into the canyon for the first time in history. It was widened and improved in subsequent decades, and the famous Skipper's Suspension Bridge, completed in 1901, added a river crossing that made the upper canyon accessible year-round. Today the road still follows exactly the same ledge that the gold rush workers carved. The schist walls rise above you and fall away below exactly as they did 160 years ago. Nothing about the canyon has changed. Only the vehicles using the ledge have. And if Skipper's Canyon honors the gold rush workers who carved it, wait until you travel to France where, in the limestone cliffs of the Vercors, Massif workers in the 1860s dangled on ropes between vertical walls to drill holes for explosives. Building a road that is neither quite tunnel nor quite open air in one of the most dramatic locations in the entire French Alps. The Straits of Mackinac, the narrow water connection between Lake Michigan and Lake Huron, is one of the most meteorologically complex inland waterway environments in North America. In winter, ice forms on the straits in patterns determined by temperature gradients, wind direction, and the complex interaction of two Great Lakes mixing at a narrow point. In summer, fog can descend with nearly no warning and reduce visibility to zero in minutes. In autumn, the Great Lakes generate storms, freshwater hurricanes, some call them, whose wind speeds and wave heights bear no resemblance to the calm lake surface that summer tourists photograph. And across this environment, the Mackinac Bridge has been standing since 1957. The Mackinac Bridge, the mighty Mac, stretches approximately 5 miles between Mackinac City on the Lower Peninsula and St. Ignace on the Upper Peninsula. The suspended portion of the bridge is the longest in the Western Hemisphere, approximately 3,800 feet of cable-supported deck, hanging from 2 towers rising 552 feet above the water. The main cables consist of tens of thousands of individual steel wires, each one woven into a 24.5-inch diameter strand that carries a portion of the total load. The total steel wire used in the 2 main cables would, if unraveled and stretched out, extend approximately 42,000 miles, more than 1.5 times around the Earth. The central section of the Mackinac Bridge deck is open grating rather than solid concrete. This is not an accident, and it is not a budget decision. It is a specific engineering response to the wind conditions in the Straits of Mackinac. A solid deck at this location and elevation would catch the wind like a sail and impose enormous lateral forces on the cable system. The open grating allows wind to pass through the deck surface, dramatically reducing the force applied to the structure while simultaneously creating the experience for drivers of seeing the water 200 feet below through the road surface beneath their tires. In strong crosswinds, the deck moves, visibly, detectably. In the steering wheel and in the body. Some drivers request escort services. The Michigan Department of Transportation will drive vehicles with anxious drivers across the bridge in certain weather conditions. This is a real service. It is used. It is not embarrassing. The Mackinac Bridge in a strong crosswind is a physical experience that does not require a history of anxiety to find genuinely demanding. Dubai is a city that frames its own ambition. The Dubai frame is one of its most direct architectural statements, a massive rectangular structure standing between old and new Dubai, literally framing the city's transformation. At first glance, it is simple, two vertical towers connected by a horizontal bridge at the top. But that simplicity is what makes it powerful. It does not compete with the skyline, it isolates it. One side of the frame looks toward historic Dubai, low-rise buildings, traditional neighborhoods, and older urban textures. The other side looks toward modern skyscrapers, glass towers, and rapid vertical expansion. The structure forces both views into a single visual comparison. You do not move through the city, you observe its contrast. The Upper Sky Bridge acts as a viewing platform, but also as a conceptual threshold. Standing on, it creates a psychological split, past on one side, future on the other, with your position acting as the present moment between them. The glass floor intensifies this effect. Looking down, the structure becomes transparent, exposing the vertical drop and reinforcing the feeling of suspended observation. Structurally, the frame is engineered for extreme loads. Wind forces in Dubai's open desert environment can be intense, especially at height. The rectangular geometry creates unique pressure distribution challenges, requiring reinforced steel cores and carefully tuned joints that allow slight movement without structural fatigue. At night, LED lighting turns the frame into a glowing outline of the city itself. It becomes visible from far distances, like a giant luminous portal placed within the urban landscape. But its true power is conceptual. It is not designed to house life or activity in the traditional sense. It is designed to compare time. A structure that does not simply stand in the city, but divides it into eras. In Florida, water is never just scenery. It is a force that defines infrastructure. The Sunshine Skyway Bridge stretches across Tampa Bay like a long, elevated line of controlled tension. It replaces an older bridge that once collapsed after a ship collision, and its design reflects that history, built not only for traffic, but for resilience. At first glance, it is elegant, tall pylons rising above the water, supporting a cable-stayed system that holds the roadway in a sweeping arc across the bay. But beneath that elegance is a structure designed for survival. Wind, saltwater corrosion, storms, and heavy maritime traffic all shape its engineering requirements. The cables fan outward from the pylons, distributing load evenly across the roadway while allowing the bridge to remain flexible under stress. This flexibility is essential in a hurricane-prone region where wind forces can shift rapidly and violently. The roadway itself is elevated high above shipping lanes. This clearance is not symbolic, it is functional. Massive cargo ships pass beneath without interfering with the bridge structure, while the height reduces exposure to storm surge impacts during extreme weather events. Visually, the bridge feels almost suspended in isolation. Surrounded by open water, it creates a sense of uninterrupted horizon. At sunrise, it becomes a thin silhouette against orange skies. At night, its lighting forms a continuous ribbon across darkness, guiding movement across the bay. But its most important characteristic is not beauty, it is endurance. Every component is designed to withstand long-term exposure to salt air and wind stress. Maintenance is continuous, because in such an environment, neglect is not gradual, it is immediate failure. It is not just a crossing over water. It is a structure built to survive a landscape that never stops moving. In the sandstone peaks of Zhangjiajie, vertical movement becomes part of the landscape itself. The Bailong elevator is not built beside the cliffs, it is embedded into them. Rising more than 300 meters along the face of a sheer rock pillar, it is one of the few human-made structures that does not compete with nature's verticality, but mirrors it. At ground level, the forest feels dense and enclosed. Paths wind through humid terrain, and the cliffs above are barely visible through mist. Then the elevator entrance appears, quiet, almost understated, before the ascent begins. Inside the glass capsule, the experience shifts immediately. The rock wall is no longer distant, it is inches away. Layers of stone, vegetation, and erosion patterns pass in rapid succession, revealing geological time compressed into a single vertical journey. What normally takes hours of climbing is reduced to minutes of controlled acceleration. The structure itself is anchored deep into the cliff. Steel frameworks are drilled into the rock at multiple points, distributing load across unstable surfaces shaped by millions of years of weathering. The engineering challenge is not height alone, it is unpredictability. The cliff face is not uniform, it shifts in density, texture, and stability. Wind adds another variable. At elevation, gusts can become sudden and directional, requiring stabilization systems that continuously adjust the elevator's balance and speed. Despite this, the motion feels smooth, almost detached from the environment it moves through. At the top, the forest reappears, but from a completely different perspective. What once felt like an impenetrable vertical barrier is now something you have moved through, not around. It is not just an elevator. It is a temporary rewriting of gravity inside a living mountain. North Yungas Road, Bolivia, 600 meters straight down. No guardrail, no barrier, no second chance. The North Yungas Road in Bolivia is known around the world by one name, and that name says everything you need to know before you even look at a map: the Death Road. 64 kilometers of track connecting the capital city of La Paz with the humid jungle region of Yungas, running along cliffs so extreme, so vertical, so completely unprotected, that for decades this road was officially recognized as the most dangerous in the entire world. The statistics from the era before a safer alternative route was built are staggering. Hundreds of fatalities every single year. Vehicles going over the edge and falling hundreds of meters into the jungle below, often not discovered for days. The crosses and small shrines that line the road are not decorative. Each one marks a place where someone did not make it. The track, in its most dangerous sections, narrows to approximately 3 meters. That is barely enough for a single large truck to pass through. And here is the thing about trucks on the Death Road. They do use it, or they did. Loaded trucks heading in both directions, on a track barely wide enough for one, on the edge of a cliff, with a drop of up to 600 meters into the valley below. The rule of the road here is unique in Bolivia and possibly in the world. Vehicles drive on the left side, which is the opposite of normal Bolivian traffic convention. The reason is practical and grim. Driving on the left puts the driver's side window facing the cliff edge, so the driver can actually look down and judge exactly how close the wheels are to the precipice. Without that visibility, drivers were going over the edge blind. Today, most freight traffic uses the newer, safer alternative highway, but the Death Road itself has found a second life as an adventure tourism destination. Cyclists, in particular, come from around the world to descend it on mountain bikes, an experience that is terrifying, spectacular, and utterly unforgettable. The danger is still very real even today, and accidents still happen. But the road that once swallowed vehicles whole now draws thousands of people who want to feel something true and visceral and alive. There is a particular kind of silence on the Death Road, especially in the early morning before the cyclists arrive. The jungle is alive with sounds, but the road itself is quiet. And in that quiet, you feel the weight of everything that happened here. If the Death Road leaves you breathless from fear and beauty combined, get ready for a road in Taiwan where marble cliffs rise hundreds of meters on both sides, the tunnels have no lights, and the rocks are always falling without warning. Three bridges cross the Yangpu River in the area of Yangpu district in Shanghai's north. The Yangpu Bridge, the third of these to be completed, is the oldest cable-stayed bridge of the three, and the one that arrives at its visual impact through scale rather than subtlety. Towers 223 meters tall, a main cable span of 602 meters. Red-painted concrete surfaces that at certain times of day and in certain light conditions produce a color temperature that sits uncomfortably between industrial and monumental. The Yangpu Bridge does not defer to its surroundings. It asserts itself. The Yangpu River at the Yangpu crossing is subject to currents that shift with tidal cycles in the Yangtze estuary downstream, creating flow patterns that change direction multiple times per day and generate complex hydraulic conditions at the bridge piers. Large vessels navigating this section must coordinate their movements with the current direction to maintain steerage. An error in timing a transit here is not merely inconvenient, but potentially dangerous in a river with traffic densities that make collision risk real. The bridge towers stand in this environment, their foundations anchored into the riverbanks rather than the active channel, but the hydrodynamic forces on the approach structures are present and continuously monitored. The hollow visual effect that drivers on the Yangpu Bridge report, the sense that the perspective alignment of the approach slope and the bridge deck creates ambiguity about real distance, is a documented navigation concern. The approach ramp from Yangpu district rises to bridge deck height in a curve that, at certain approach speeds, makes the connection between ramp and deck appear to occur later than it does. The consequence, vehicles entering the bridge deck at a speed and angle calibrated for the ramp rather than the deck, is a specific, recurring cause of the control incidents that the Yangpu Bridge records at higher frequency than its more recently designed peers. The bridge has appeared in multiple Chinese films depicting collapse scenarios, a choice by filmmakers that reflects the bridge's visual dominance and the specific aesthetic of its towers, which frame open space in a way that photographic composition treats as inherently dramatic. There is a particular angle, approaching from the north, at which the two towers align with the river and the sky in a way that film directors and photographers have exploited consistently. Red concrete against gray water, the cable geometry creating a fan pattern above the roadway. The river below suggesting depth and movement and the fundamental indifference of flowing water to what humans have chosen to build above it. Dubai's skyline is defined by escalation, but the Burj Khalifa is where escalation becomes absolute. At 828 meters, it does not simply rise above the city, it redefines the scale at which the city is perceived. Everything below it becomes relative, compressed, and visually subordinate to its vertical dominance. Its form is not arbitrary. The structure is based on a triple-lobed footprint derived from regional architectural patterns designed to reduce wind vortex formation. As height increases, wind becomes the primary structural challenge. At extreme altitudes, air does not flow smoothly. It shears, twists, and creates oscillating forces that can destabilize rigid towers. The Burj Khalifa counters this with gradual setbacks. As the building rises, its mass reduces in stepped layers, allowing wind to pass around it rather than collide with a single surface. This tapering design is not aesthetic, it is aerodynamic necessity translated into architecture. Inside, vertical transportation becomes a system of controlled compression. Elevators move at high speeds between sky lobbies, where occupants transfer between zones. The sensation is not of continuous ascent, but of segmented altitude jumps, each section of the tower functioning almost like a separate vertical city. At higher floors, environmental conditions shift subtly. Temperatures are lower, wind is stronger, and the building itself sways slightly within engineered limits that are imperceptible without instruments but essential for structural survival. From the observation levels, the desert spreads outward like an endless gradient of sand and urban density. The horizon feels closer, almost flattened by height. The Burj Khalifa does not simply extend upward. It compresses everything below into a single layered map of human expansion. Dubai's architectural language often explores motion frozen in form. The twisted bridge is a pedestrian structure defined not by straight traversal, but by continuous rotation. As you move across it, the pathway subtly turns and spirals, creating the sensation of walking through a controlled distortion of space. At ground level, it appears like a ribbon caught mid-twist. Its structure is composed of steel segments engineered to support torsional forces, stress created by twisting motion along the bridge's axis. Unlike traditional bridges that resist vertical load, this design must also resist rotational stress distributed unevenly along its span. The geometry is not decorative. It is structural necessity shaped into visual expression. As pedestrians cross, their orientation changes gradually. The horizon shifts. The water or roadway beneath appears to rotate relative to the body's frame of reference. This creates a subtle disorientation, not extreme, but perceptually significant enough to alter awareness of direction. Lighting enhances this effect at night. Embedded LEDs trace the bridge's spiral form, making the twist more visible and amplifying the sense of motion even when the structure is static. Wind interaction is also complex. The curved surfaces must reduce oscillation caused by airflow passing through and around the twisting form. Aerodynamic modeling ensures that vibrations remain within safe limits even under strong gusts. From a distance, the bridge resembles a frozen motion loop, as if it was caught mid-turn and never completed its rotation. It does not simply connect two points. It transforms crossing into an experience of continuous spatial change. Between Denmark and Sweden, the boundary is not a wall, it is a gradient of engineering. The Oresund Bridge begins as a bridge above open water, but then transforms into a tunnel beneath the sea. This dual identity is not symbolic. It is a direct response to aviation routes near Copenhagen Airport and the need to maintain uninterrupted maritime navigation. From the Danish side, the structure rises from land like a conventional cable-stayed bridge. Tall pylons anchor sweeping cables that hold the roadway above the Oresund Strait. Vehicles move across a long elevated span where water stretches endlessly on both sides, giving the sensation of crossing an exposed horizontal axis between two nations. But midway, something changes. The bridge disappears. Cars enter an artificial island transition zone, then descend into the Drogden Tunnel, a submerged passage built from prefabricated concrete segments placed on the seabed. Inside, the environment shifts from open horizon to enclosed geometry. Sound becomes muted, light becomes artificial, and direction is felt rather than seen. The engineering logic behind this transition is complex. A bridge alone would interfere with flight paths. A tunnel alone would be too costly and disruptive to marine conditions. The hybrid solution merges both systems into a continuous transport link that adapts to environmental constraints rather than forcing them to adapt. Structural stability in the submerged section depends on precise alignment. Each tunnel segment must remain watertight under sea pressure, with joints sealed against long-term water infiltration. Even minor misalignment could compromise the entire system. At the Swedish end, the structure re-emerges from the sea, returning to bridge form and open sky. The crossing does not feel like a single structure. It feels like two different realities stitched together by necessity. In Las Vegas, architecture is no longer static surface. It is programmable atmosphere. The sphere rises as a massive spherical volume, fully wrapped in high-resolution LED panels that transform its exterior into a dynamic visual system. Unlike traditional buildings, it does not present a fixed facade. It projects an evolving image layer that can simulate anything from planetary surfaces to abstract motion fields. From a distance, it appears unreal, a perfect geometric form glowing in the desert night, constantly shifting its appearance like a living digital organism. The scale is immense, making the sphere feel less like a building and more like an environmental object inserted into the city. Inside, the experience becomes even more controlled. The interior dome wraps audiences in a continuous visual and acoustic field. Sound is delivered through spatial audio systems that map direction and distance with extreme precision, allowing audio to move through space rather than simply play from speakers. Visual resolution is engineered for immersion. The curved LED surface eliminates traditional screen boundaries, replacing them with a seamless hemispherical projection field. This removes the viewer's sense of frame. There is no edge, only environment. The engineering challenge lies in synchronization. Every LED panel must operate in perfect timing alignment to prevent visual distortion across curvature. Thermal expansion, structural movement, and signal latency are all accounted for in system design. The result is not a screen. It is a full-scale artificial environment that replaces architectural interiority with simulated reality. At night, the sphere becomes a landmark that does not illuminate the city, it redefines it. A glowing planet dropped into the desert grid. Snake Island, Brazil. Off the coast of São Paulo state, approximately 90 miles from the Brazilian mainland, there is an island that the Brazilian Navy has officially declared off-limits to all visitors. No tourists, no settlers, no unauthorized researchers. The reason is straightforward and chilling. The island is home to the highest concentration of venomous snakes anywhere on Earth. Ilha de Queimada Grande, known universally as Snake Island, covers just 110 acres of dense rainforest, rocky terrain, and dramatic coastal cliffs. Within those 110 acres live between 2,000 and 4,000 golden lancehead pit vipers, one of the world's most venomous snake species. Conservative estimates place the density at approximately 1 snake per square meter in certain areas. In reality, some researchers suggest the actual density in the forest interior may be significantly higher. Every rock, every root system, every hollow log, every patch of low vegetation potentially conceals a snake capable of killing an adult human within hours. The golden lancehead is a species found nowhere else on Earth. It exists only on this island. It evolved here in complete isolation over roughly 11,000 years, when rising sea levels at the end of the last ice age severed Queimada Grande from the Brazilian mainland, stranding a small founding population of pit vipers with no way out. Isolated on the island, with an ample food supply, migratory birds that land on the island to rest during seasonal movements, the snakes evolved rapidly. They grew slightly smaller than their mainland relatives to better ambush birds. Their venom became dramatically more potent, 3 to 5 times stronger than the mainland lancehead, because a bird, once bitten, must be incapacitated before it can fly away and carry the snake with it. The island itself created the evolutionary pressure that produced this lethal arsenal. The venom of the golden lancehead destroys tissue, causes uncontrolled bleeding, and can trigger kidney failure and brain hemorrhage. There is no clinical treatment available on the mainland without rapid access to anti-venom, and reaching the mainland from the island takes hours. The last lighthouse keeper stationed on the island and his family were found dead, reportedly the victims of snakes that had entered their quarters through open windows and door gaps. Following that event, the lighthouse was automated and the island was abandoned to its serpentine inhabitants. Today, the only authorized visitors are occasional researchers from the Butantan Institute in Sao Paulo, Brazil's leading toxinology research facility. They study the island's viper population for scientific and medical purposes, cardiovascular medicine. From the sea, Queimada Grande looks paradoxically peaceful, green, lush, dramatic cliffs dropping into the Atlantic. It is only when you know what awaits beneath that canopy that the beauty becomes something else entirely. This is nature's most perfect fortress, beautiful, isolated, and utterly uninvitable. In Singapore, architecture is stacked not just upward, but across connections. Marina Bay Sands is defined by its 3 towers, each rising independently before being unified by a massive horizontal sky park that spans across their tops. This structure creates the illusion of a ship resting above the skyline, but its engineering is far more grounded in structural precision than metaphor. The sky park is not decorative. It is a massive cantilevered platform that distributes weight across all 3 towers while maintaining stability under wind load and dynamic movement. Each tower can move independently due to wind sway. The connecting deck must accommodate this movement without structural failure, requiring flexible joints and carefully engineered load transfer systems that absorb differential motion. At the top, the infinity pool extends toward the skyline. Water flows to the edge but is recirculated through hidden channels, creating a visual illusion of continuity with the horizon. It is not an overflow, it is controlled hydrodynamics designed for perception. Inside, the complex functions as a multi-layered urban environment. Hotels, casinos, convention spaces, and observation decks are stacked vertically, creating a self-contained microcity above the bay. Wind at this height is significant. Aerodynamic shaping of the towers helps reduce vortex shedding, while the sky park's perforated design allows air to pass through rather than resist it fully. At night, the structure becomes a luminous landmark across Marina Bay. It is not just a hotel, it is a horizontal bridge of experience suspended above vertical towers, a fusion of separation and connection in a single engineered system. In southern France, the landscape is defined by elevation rather than density. The Millau Viaduct spans the Tarn Valley with extreme vertical precision, supported by pylons that rise higher than many skyscrapers. Instead of blending into the terrain, it dominates it, lightly, almost delicately, as if touching the valley rather than occupying it. From below, the structure feels impossibly thin. A series of slender towers rise from the valley floor, connected by a roadway that appears suspended in midair. The scale creates a visual paradox, something so large appearing almost weightless due to its refined proportions. The bridge is engineered for wind first, traffic second. At such heights, wind behavior becomes unpredictable. The viaduct's aerodynamic deck profile is designed to reduce drag and prevent oscillations that could destabilize the structure. Wind tunnel testing shaped every curvature of its design. Each pylon is independently anchored deep into bedrock. This distributes load across the valley while allowing flexibility for thermal expansion and environmental movement. The structure must respond to temperature changes, wind pressure, and long-term material fatigue without visible deformation. Driving across the viaduct creates a slow transformation of perception. Valleys open below, clouds drift at eye level, and the horizon shifts with elevation. The experience is not just crossing a gap, it is moving through stacked atmospheric layers. At sunrise, the bridge appears to float above mist filling the valley. At night, its lighting traces a faint line across darkness, barely touching the landscape. The Millau Viaduct does not dominate the valley through mass. It dominates through precision, an engineered absence of heaviness stretched across space. In Milan, architecture stops being only shelter and starts behaving like a living system. Bosco Verticale returns here not as repetition, but as reinforcement of an idea that is still unusual in global architecture: buildings that actively host ecosystems instead of separating from them. These two residential towers are not simply covered in greenery, they are structured to support continuous plant life at altitude. From a distance, the silhouette changes with seasons. In summer, the towers appear dense and heavy with foliage, almost like vertical hills of vegetation rising from the urban grid. In autumn, the color palette shifts into warm fragmentation, reds, yellows, and browns, breaking the uniformity of concrete. In winter, the structure becomes more architectural again, revealing the skeletal geometry beneath the plant layer. Each balcony functions as an ecological platform. Trees, shrubs, and climbing plants are positioned based on weight distribution, sunlight exposure, and wind resistance. This is not decorative landscaping, it is calibrated biodiversity embedded into structural engineering. The challenge is constant maintenance. At high altitude, wind pressure increases and plant growth behaves differently than at ground level. Specialized teams maintain the vegetation using suspended systems, replacing and pruning species to keep the ecosystem balanced over time. But the deeper shift is conceptual. The building does not treat nature as something outside the city. It treats it as something that can be distributed vertically across human habitation. A structure that does not end at walls, but continues into biological life.